Did your hands always shake when someone mentioned my mother? The question had not been asked yet, but before the night was over, billionaire Alexander Vale would discover that some names could reopen doors money had kept locked for 20 years. Manhattan glittered beneath a cold October sky as crystal chandeliers washed the Grand Vale Hotel ballroom in gold. Politicians, investors, surgeons, and celebrities moved beneath the lights with practiced elegance, champagne glasses catching reflections from the skyline beyond the windows. At 43, Alexander stood at the center of it all. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, he carried the quiet authority of a white billionaire whose name appeared on buildings, foundations, and magazine covers. Tonight was supposed to celebrate another victory, the 20th anniversary of the Vale Educational Foundation. Yet Alexander felt strangely detached from the applause. On stage, an enormous screen displayed photographs of scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Mr. Vale, his assistant approached carefully. There's a young guest asking to speak with you. Tomorrow. She says it's about her mother. Alexander barely reacted. Everyone wants something tonight. She doesn't. Something in the assistant's voice made him turn. Near the ballroom entrance stood a black girl of perhaps 11 years old. Her deep brown skin glowed beneath the chandelier light. Natural curls framed a serious, intelligent face, and she wore a modest navy dress among gowns worth more than most families earned in months. She was holding something against her chest. An old photograph. Alexander's expression changed before he could stop it. The girl noticed. She walked toward him. No hesitation. No fear. Around them, conversations continued, unaware that Alexander Vale's carefully controlled world had just shifted. Are you Mr. Alexander Vale? She asked. Yes. I'm Nia Bennett. Bennett. His breathing stopped for half a second. The orchestra seemed suddenly distant. What did you say? Nia Bennett. Her eyes searched his face. My mom's name was Simone Bennett. Alexander's champagne glass tilted dangerously in his hand. Simone. 21 years collapsed into one name. A summer afternoon. A yellow dress moving through sunlight. Laughter beside a lake. A promise he had once believed he would keep forever. Then a hospital corridor. His father's voice. A closed door. Silence. Alexander carefully placed his glass on a nearby table. Where is your mother? Nia's confidence weakened. She died last year. The words struck without drama. That made them worse. Alexander looked away, but Nia lifted the photograph. I found this inside her favorite book. He recognized it immediately. Simone stood beneath an old oak tree, smiling into the camera. Beside her was a younger Alexander, 22 years old and completely unguarded. On the back, in his own handwriting, were 4 words, someday, when we're free. Alexander's fingers began to tremble. Nia watched them. Then she looked directly into his eyes and asked, softly enough that only he could hear, Did you know my mom? Alexander opened his mouth. Nothing came. For the first time in decades, the billionaire had no prepared answer, no contract, no wall strong enough to protect him. Because around Nia's neck hung a small silver pendant he had given Simone the night she disappeared. Where did you get that necklace? Alexander's voice was so quiet that Nia instinctively touched the silver pendant resting against her chest. The ballroom still glittered around them, filled with music and laughter, but Alexander no longer saw any of it. His attention remained fixed on the tiny oval pendant. 21 years earlier, he had fastened it around Simone Bennett's neck beneath an oak tree at his family's Connecticut estate. Inside were 2 miniature photographs, one of Simone, one of him. It belonged to my mom, Nia said. She wore it almost every day. Alexander swallowed. May I see it? Nia hesitated before removing the chain. She placed it carefully in his palm. The metal was warmer than he remembered, its surface scratched by years of use. His thumb found the hidden clasp. Click. The pendant opened. Simone's photograph remained on the left, but Alexander's picture was gone. In its place was a tiny photograph of Nia as a baby. Something tightened behind his ribs. There used to be another picture here. Nia's eyes sharpened. Yours? Alexander looked at her. The question carried no accusation, only intelligence. Yes. Nia absorbed the answer quietly. Then you really knew her. I did. How? Alexander closed the pendant. Across the ballroom, his sister Victoria was watching them. Her expression had changed from curiosity to alarm. That alone told Alexander this conversation belonged somewhere private. Come with me. He led Nia through a side corridor into the hotel library, where dark shelves and amber lamps muted the noise of the gala. He left the door open and asked his assistant to remain nearby. Nia sat opposite him, still holding the old photograph. Your mother and I met when we were 21, Alexander began. She worked at a neighborhood literacy center funded by my family. A faint smile touched his face. She thought rich people talked too much. Nia almost smiled. That sounds like Mom. The expression vanished from Alexander's face. She wanted to become an architect. She could walk into an abandoned building and describe what it might become. She became one. Alexander froze. What? An architect? She designed community housing. Pride warmed Nia's voice. She said beautiful buildings shouldn't belong only to wealthy people. Alexander lowered his eyes. Simone had done it. She had built the life they once imagined together. Without him. Why did you stop knowing her? Nia asked. The question was harder. Alexander leaned back. I was told she left. By who? Before he could answer, the library door opened. Victoria Vale stood there, pale beneath perfect makeup. Alexander. He rose slowly. Not now. Victoria's gaze moved to Nia, then to the photograph. Fear flashed across her face. Where did she get that? Nia instinctively pulled it closer. Alexander noticed. You recognize Simone? Victoria said nothing. That silence was enough. Alexander stepped toward his sister. 21 years ago, Father told me Simone took money and disappeared. Victoria's lips parted. Alexander, was that true? Her eyes filled with something he had never expected. Shame. Nia looked between them. Victoria whispered. Simone never took the money. Alexander became completely still. What money? Victoria closed the door behind her. The money Father offered her to leave you. The room seemed to lose its air. Alexander stared at his sister. She refused him. Victoria continued. Every dollar. Nia's fingers tightened around the photograph. Alexander's voice turned cold. Then why did she disappear? Victoria looked at Nia. Because your father threatened to destroy the one person Simone loved more than you. Alexander followed her gaze toward the 11-year-old girl. But Nia had not even been born then. And suddenly Alexander understood there was another secret waiting beneath the first. Who was she protecting? Alexander asked. Victoria remained beside the closed library door, one hand resting against the brass handle as if she needed something solid beneath her fingers. Her mother, she said. Nia's expression changed. Grandma Evelyn? Victoria nodded slowly. Evelyn Bennett owned a small apartment building in Harlem. Your grandfather's company wanted the entire block for redevelopment. Alexander felt the first spark of recognition. Vale Urban Renewal. His father's most controversial project. Alexander had been 22 then, too consumed by business school and Simone to understand what was happening beneath the polished presentations. Father threatened Evelyn's home. More than that, Victoria whispered. He told Simone that if she stayed with you, he would bury her mother in legal battles until she had nothing left. Alexander turned toward the dark window. His reflection stared back at him. Black tuxedo, controlled posture, the polished image of everything his father had designed him to become. And you knew? Not all of it. Not then. But enough. Victoria lowered her eyes. That was answer enough. Nia sat very still. My mom never said she was afraid of your family. Alexander looked at her. Your mother was never afraid for herself. The words came from memory. Simone standing outside the literacy center during a summer storm, arguing with a landlord twice her age because he had ignored a leaking ceiling. Simone defending strangers as though their dignity belonged to her personally. Alexander had loved that about her. Then he had believed she abandoned him. What happened after she refused the money? He asked. Victoria crossed the room and opened her evening bag. From inside, she removed an old folded envelope. Father gave me this 6 months before he died. Alexander recognized Simone's handwriting immediately. His name was written across the front. Why do you have that? Because he intercepted it. Alexander's face hardened. Give it to me. Victoria placed the envelope in his hand. The seal had already been broken. 21 years too late, Alexander unfolded the letter. Alex, I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. Your father has made it clear what staying will cost my family. Please don't come looking for me. If you love me, let me protect what I have left. He stopped reading. Beneath those lines was another sentence, written darker, as though Simone had pressed the pen harder into the page. There is something else I need to tell you, but I'm afraid if I put it in writing, he will find out. Alexander's pulse changed. Nia watched his face. What was she going to tell you? I don't know. But suddenly he remembered the final week before Simone vanished. She had called him 3 times. He had been traveling with his father. Richard Vale had taken his phone during meetings. When Alexander returned, Simone was gone. His father produced bank records showing a payment supposedly made to her. Alexander had believed them. Because betrayal had been easier to understand than conspiracy, Nia reached into her small purse. Maybe this helps. She removed a sealed white envelope. Alexander stared at it. What is that? Mom left it for me. Why bring it tonight? Nia looked directly at him. Because it says I should only open it if I ever met Alexander Vale. His hands began trembling again. Nia carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph. She turned it over. Simone had written a date on the back. Alexander saw it and lost every trace of color in his face. The photograph had been taken exactly 11 months before Nia was born. 11 months before I was born, Nia whispered. Alexander did not answer. He stared at the photograph as though it had shifted the floor beneath him. Simone stood outside a small brick building in Harlem, older than the woman he remembered from the lake, but unmistakably herself. Beside her stood Alexander, not 22-year-old Alexander. This photograph had been taken years later. Victoria stepped closer. That's impossible. Alexander remembered the night. Rain. A charity conference in Boston. A hotel lobby where he had seen Simone across a crowded room after nearly a decade of silence. She had disappeared before he could reach her. Or so he had always believed. Then memory returned in fragments. He had followed her outside. They had talked until morning in a quiet cafe. Simone had told him she was doing well. Alexander had apologized for believing his father. Neither had spoken about rebuilding what they lost. Yet when they parted, Simone had embraced him for a long time. Someone took this without us knowing, Alexander said. Nia turned the photograph over again. Beneath the date was an address. That's my old apartment, she said. Alexander's pulse quickened. Did your mother live there when you were born? Yes. Victoria's face had become pale. Alexander, don't assume anything. He looked at her coldly. I've spent 21 years assuming what father wanted me to assume. Nia remained silent, watching him process a possibility neither of them was ready to name. Alexander crouched so they were closer to eye level. Nia, did your mother ever tell you about your father? She said he didn't know about me. The answer landed like glass breaking. Anything else? Only that he wasn't a bad man. Nia swallowed. She said he was a good man who once believed a bad lie. Alexander closed his eyes. Simone, even after everything, she had protected him from becoming a villain in his daughter's imagination. Daughter. The word entered his mind without permission. He immediately pushed it away. A date was not proof. A photograph was not proof. Emotion could not become truth simply because he wanted it to. There's more in the envelope, Nia said. She removed a small brass key and a card bearing the name Bennett Community Design Center. Mom told me there was a box in her office that I shouldn't open until I was older. Where is it? Alexander asked. Harlem. 40 minutes later, the ballroom's chandeliers had been replaced by fluorescent hallway lights. Alexander, Victoria, and Nia stood inside Simone's former design studio. Architectural drawings covered the walls, schools, affordable apartments, community gardens. Simone had built everything she once dreamed of. Nia unlocked a cabinet beneath her mother's desk. Inside waited a wooden box. Alexander lifted the lid. Letters, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a sealed medical document bearing Simone Bennett's name. Nia reached for it, but Alexander stopped himself from touching it. That belongs to you. She opened the envelope carefully. Her eyes moved across the page, then stopped. What does it say? Victoria asked. Nia looked at Alexander. Her expression was no longer curious. It was stunned. It says my mother requested a paternity test when I was born. Alexander's breath caught. And Nia turned the page. The results section had been removed, cut cleanly away. But underneath it was another handwritten note from Simone. If Alexander ever finds this, tell him his father already knew the answer. Your father already knew the answer. Alexander heard the sentence, but for several seconds, he could not make sense of it. The fluorescent lights hummed above Simone's abandoned studio. Around him stood the evidence of the life she had built without him. architectural models, community plans, photographs of families standing proudly before new homes. And inside a wooden box sat proof that Richard Vale had reached into that life too. How could my grandfather know? Nia asked. Alexander looked at her. He refused to give her an answer built from fear. We don't know yet. Victoria remained near the cabinet, unusually silent. Alexander noticed. Victoria. She looked away. What? You knew about the letter. You knew father threatened Simone. What else did he tell you? Nothing about Nia. That wasn't my question. Victoria's composure finally fractured. A year before father died, I found a file in his private safe. Alexander went still. What file? It had Simone's name on it. Where is it now? Vale House. The old family mansion on Long Island had remained nearly untouched since Richard's death. Alexander had avoided it for years. Too many rooms still carried his father's presence. Tonight, avoidance was no longer an option. Nia carefully returned Simone's documents to the wooden box. I'm coming. Alexander shook his head. It's late. This is about my mother. Her voice remained respectful, but firm. And maybe about me. He could not argue with that. An hour later, their car passed through the iron gates of Vale House. Moonlight silvered the stone facade. Inside, the mansion smelled of cedar, old books, and memories nobody had disturbed. Victoria led them upstairs to Richard's study. Alexander switched on the desk lamp. Gold light spilled across the room. The safe is behind that painting. Victoria pointed toward a portrait of Richard Vale. Alexander almost laughed at the symbolism. Even dead, his father stood between them and the truth. He removed the portrait and entered the code Victoria remembered. The safe opened. Inside were corporate records, property deeds, and one thin blue folder. Simone Bennett. Alexander lifted it out. His hands were steady now. Anger had replaced shock. Inside were copies of Simone's letters, photographs taken without her knowledge, and financial reports tracking her architecture firm. Richard had monitored her for years. Then Alexander found the medical record. A laboratory report. Nia stepped closer but did not touch it. Alexander read the date. 11 years earlier. The year Nia was born. At the bottom of the page were the words, probability of paternity. His eyes moved toward the result. 99%. The room disappeared around him. Alexander gripped the edge of the desk. Nia watched his face. Is it you? He could barely breathe. But before answering, he noticed something clipped behind the report. A handwritten letter from Richard. Alexander unfolded it. Son, if you ever find this, then I have failed twice. First by separating you from Simone, and again by keeping you from your daughter. Alexander's lips trembled. Nia stood only a few feet away. 11 years of birthdays. First steps. School mornings. Lost teeth. Bedtime stories. A childhood he had never known existed. He looked at her, his eyes shining with something wealth had never taught him how to contain. Nia, she held her breath. Alexander's voice broke. I'm your father. I'm your father. The words did not sound powerful. They did not sound like the voice Alexander used in boardrooms or interviews. They sounded fragile. Human. Nia stood motionless beside Richard Vale's desk, staring at the laboratory report between them. Alexander wanted to cross the room. To hold her. To somehow recover 11 missing years in one impossible moment. He did none of those things. This truth belonged to Nia too. She deserved space to receive it. Did my mom know? She finally asked. Yes. Alexander's voice softened. It appears she did. And your father knew? Yes. Nia looked toward Richard's portrait leaning against the wall. But you didn't. Alexander swallowed. No, she lowered her eyes. The silence that followed hurt more than anger would have. Why didn't Mom tell you? Alexander looked at Simone's photograph. I think she tried. Victoria quietly moved toward the doorway. I'll give you both some privacy. Nia immediately shook her head. Please stay. Victoria stopped. Alexander understood. Nia had discovered a father tonight. That did not mean she trusted him yet. He returned to Richard's letter. There were several pages beneath the confession. Simone contacted me after Nia's birth. She wanted Alexander told immediately. I convinced her that revealing the truth would bring the Vale family into the child's life, along with publicity, lawyers, and everything she had spent years escaping. Alexander's jaw tightened. Richard had disguised control as protection. Again, Simone agreed to wait until she believed Nia was old enough to understand. I used that time to ensure she never found the courage. Alexander closed his eyes. He manipulated her. Nia's voice was quiet. Mom was scared. Probably. She didn't scare easily. No, Alexander looked at her. She was one of the bravest people I ever knew. Nia's expression softened for half a second. He continued reading. I told myself I was protecting my son from scandal and my granddaughter from becoming a headline. The truth is simpler. I was protecting myself from Alexander discovering what I had done to Simone years earlier. Alexander lowered the letter. There it was. Not love. Not legacy. Cowardice. Nia walked toward the window. Moonlight outlined her small figure against the glass. I used to imagine my dad. Alexander's throat tightened. What did you imagine? Sometimes a teacher. Sometimes an architect like Mom. She glanced back. Once I decided he was an astronaut. A broken laugh escaped Alexander before he could stop it. Nia almost smiled. Billionaire wasn't on the list. Understandable. The small moment vanished as quickly as it came. Alexander approached, stopping several feet away. Nia, I cannot ask you to call me Dad. I cannot ask you to trust me because of a piece of paper. Her eyes met his. Then what do you want? Alexander looked at the child whose entire life had existed beyond the walls built by his family. A chance to know you. Nia studied him carefully. Mom said trust isn't something rich people can buy. This time Alexander smiled through wet eyes. That definitely sounds like Simone. Nia touched the pendant at her neck. There's one more place Mom wanted me to visit if I ever found you. Alexander's smile faded. Where? She removed a folded card from behind the pendant. On it was an address in Brooklyn and 4 words in Simone's handwriting. Take Alexander here first. Alexander stared at the address. He recognized it. The building had once been the literacy center where he and Simone met. And suddenly he understood. Even after death, Simone had not sent her daughter toward his mansion. She had sent Alexander back to where their story began. This is where you met her? Nia asked. Alexander stood beneath the faded blue awning of the old Brooklyn Literacy Center, staring through windows that carried 21 years of dust and memory. Right here, dawn was beginning to soften the city, turning the wet sidewalks silver. The neighborhood had changed, new cafes, renovated apartments, brighter storefronts. But this building remained almost exactly as Alexander remembered it. Nia unlocked the front door with a key hidden inside Simone's envelope. The hinges protested softly. Inside, rows of empty bookshelves waited beneath warm emergency lights. Children's drawings still decorated one wall. Alexander stepped forward and suddenly saw Simone at 21, standing behind the reception desk with a pencil tucked into her curls. You're late, she had told him during their first meeting. People usually wait for me, he had replied. Simone had smiled. Then today will be educational. Alexander almost laughed at the memory. What? Nia asked. Your mother wasn't impressed by me. She wasn't impressed by anybody with expensive shoes. Alexander looked down at his handmade Italian shoes. Apparently, I learned nothing. Nia smiled. It was small but real. They continued toward the back room. On the door was a brass plaque, Simone Bennett Community Architecture Project. Alexander stopped. She bought the building. She saved it, Nia corrected. Inside, architectural models covered long tables. One showed affordable apartments surrounding a garden and library. Another showed a school with enormous windows. Then Alexander noticed a model beneath glass. Vale Bennett Community Center. He stared at the name. She kept Vale? Nia pointed toward a handwritten note beside it. Read that. Alexander leaned closer. Alexander once told me buildings should make people feel powerful. I told him they should make people feel welcome. We were both right. His throat tightened. On the desk rested a laptop and another envelope. For Nia and Alexander. Nia opened it. Inside was a flash drive. Minutes later, Simone appeared on the laptop screen. Older. Graceful. Her deep brown skin warm beneath afternoon light. Her curls touched with silver. Alexander forgot how to breathe. Hello, Nia, Simone began. And if you followed my instructions, hello, Alex. Alexander lowered his head. Her voice. After all those years, her voice. There are truths I should have spoken sooner. Fear made me postpone them, and time convinced me there would always be another day. Nia reached for Alexander's hand without looking at him. He froze before gently closing his fingers around hers. Simone continued. Nia, Alexander is your biological father. But biology is only an introduction. What happens next must be chosen by both of you. Alexander's eyes filled. Alex, Do not punish yourself for years stolen without your knowledge. But do not waste the years still available. Nia squeezed his hand. Then Simone smiled from the screen. And please, both of you, stop being stubborn long enough to listen to each other. Nia laughed through tears. Alexander did too. The recording ended with Simone asking them to finish the community center together, not as billionaire and beneficiary, but as two people responsible for what came next. Alexander stared at the frozen image. I'll fund everything. Nia shook her head immediately. That's not what Mom asked. He looked at her. You're right. Alexander removed his jacket and placed it over a chair. Then tell me where we start. Nia pointed toward a dusty stack of plans. We start by listening. For the first time in his life, Alexander Vale sat down without taking the head of the table. And beside his daughter, beneath the roof where he had once fallen in love with her mother, the billionaire began learning how to become something far more difficult than powerful. Present. Being present is harder than writing a check, Nia said. Alexander looked up from the stack of architectural plans covering the long wooden table. Morning sunlight had finally entered the old literacy center, illuminating dust in the air like tiny fragments of gold. I'm beginning to understand that. 3 weeks had passed since the night Nia walked into his gala carrying Simone's photograph. In those 3 weeks, Alexander had canceled 6 international meetings, moved foundation responsibilities away from executives connected to his father, and spent nearly every afternoon inside the Brooklyn Center. But Simone's final request had changed more than his calendar. It had changed the way he listened. The first community meeting drew 60 residents. Alexander arrived expecting questions about budgets. Instead, people brought memories. A retired teacher remembered Simone tutoring children after work. A single mother described how Simone redesigned her apartment building so elderly residents could move safely between floors. A local architect remembered Simone refusing a prestigious downtown contract because the community center needed her more. Alexander sat quietly through every story. Nia sat beside him. For once, his name opened no doors that mattered. Simone had already opened them. After the meeting, Alexander found Nia studying the Vale Bennett model. She talked about you sometimes, Nia said. His heart shifted. What did she say? That you used to think every problem needed a solution. I still do. She said that too. Nia smiled. Then she said some things don't need fixing. They need understanding. Alexander looked toward Simone's photograph hanging near the entrance. Your mother spent 21 years teaching me lessons without being in the room. Nia's expression softened. Are you angry with her? The question surprised him. For not telling me? She nodded. Alexander took his time. Part of me is. Honesty felt more respectful than perfection. I missed your entire childhood. Nia lowered her eyes. But your mother was placed in an impossible position by my father. I won't turn her fear into another accusation against her. Nia looked back at him. Something changed between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Trust, perhaps, taking its first careful step. That evening, Alexander called a press conference. Reporters packed the Vale Foundation auditorium, expecting another corporate announcement. Instead, Alexander stood alone behind the podium. For decades, he began, my family's influence allowed decisions to remain hidden simply because exposing them would have been inconvenient. Cameras flashed. Victoria watched from the wings. Nia remained backstage. Alexander continued. He confirmed Richard Vale's interference in Simone's life, announced an independent review of past foundation practices, and transferred control of the new community project to a neighborhood-led board. Then came the question everyone had been waiting to ask. Mr. Vale, is Nia Bennett your daughter? The room erupted. Alexander did not answer immediately. He looked toward the curtain where Nia stood. They had discussed this moment beforehand. She gave one small nod. Alexander faced the cameras. Yes. More flashes. More shouting. But she is not a scandal, a revelation, or an extension of my fortune. His voice became steady. She is an 11-year-old girl who deserves the freedom to decide what our relationship becomes without strangers turning her life into entertainment. The room quieted. Her mother protected her dignity. I intend to respect it. Backstage afterward, Nia waited for him. That was pretty good, she said. Alexander smiled. Pretty good. Mom would have changed 3 sentences. He laughed. Then Nia slipped her hand into his. But she would have liked the ending. Alexander looked down at their joined hands. He had spent his life believing legacy meant leaving your name behind. Simone had taught him differently. Legacy was what remained in people after your power was gone. And for the first time, Alexander wondered whether redemption might begin not with being forgiven, but with becoming worthy of it. Do you think she would be proud of us? Nia asked. Alexander looked across the finished community center, where afternoon sunlight poured through enormous windows Simone had designed years before anyone knew they would someday carry her name. 6 months had passed. The abandoned literacy center was alive again. Children filled the reading room. Architecture students worked beside neighborhood residents upstairs. A garden stretched across the courtyard, surrounded by brick walls preserved from the original building. Nothing felt extravagant. Everything felt intentional. Above the entrance, a simple bronze sign read, "The Simone Bennett Community Center." Alexander studied it quietly. I think she would tell me I took too long. Nia smiled. Definitely. He laughed. It came easier now. At 43, Alexander Vale still controlled companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and entered rooms where people immediately recognized his name. But none of those victories compared with the small moments he had learned not to miss. Tuesday breakfasts with Nia, parent-teacher conferences, helping with science projects he barely understood, sitting in silence when she missed Simone, learning that fatherhood was not authority. It was consistency. Nia had not called him dad immediately. Alexander never asked her to. Then, one rainy evening 3 months earlier, she had fallen asleep in his car after visiting Simone's grave. When Alexander gently woke her, she had murmured, "Dad, are we home?" He had sat frozen behind the wheel after she went inside, unable to move for nearly 10 minutes. Some words were worth waiting 11 years to hear. Now, beneath the center's warm lights, Nia reached into her pocket. "I have something for you." She placed the silver pendant in his hand. Alexander stared at it. "This was your mother's. Open it." He pressed the clasp. Simone remained on the left. Nia's baby photograph remained on the right. "Look behind my picture." Alexander carefully lifted the tiny photograph. Beneath it was a folded piece of paper. Simone's handwriting. One sentence. "If he becomes the father I believe he can be, give him this back." Alexander closed his eyes. Emotion rose silently through him. Simone had known him better than he had known himself. "She believed in you," Nia said, "even when you didn't know I existed." Alexander looked at her. "Your mother deserved better from my family." "Maybe." Nia paused. "But she taught me that what people did yesterday matters less than what they choose after they understand it." Alexander smiled faintly. "You sound exactly like her." "I know." That evening, the dedication ceremony ended without fireworks or celebrity speeches. Simone would have hated both. Instead, neighborhood children switched on the courtyard lights one by one. Warm gold spread across the garden. Alexander and Nia remained beneath the old oak tree that had been transplanted from the original Vale estate at his request. Nia looked toward the branches. "This is like the tree in your photograph." That was the idea. She slipped her hand into his. "Dad," the word still stopped something inside him. "Yes." "When I asked if you knew my mom, why couldn't you speak?" Alexander looked toward Simone's name above the doorway. "Because I thought I had lost her 21 years ago." He turned to Nia. "Then you walked into that ballroom, and I realized she had returned something to me I never knew I'd lost." Nia rested her head against his arm. Alexander looked across the center Simone had imagined, at the families filling its rooms, at a future built from a truth his father had once tried to bury. Richard Vale had taught him how to preserve a legacy. Simone Bennett had taught him something greater. A legacy was not a name carved into stone. It was truth restored, dignity protected, love given another chance. And sometimes, redemption began with one brave black girl asking a billionaire a question simple enough to break 21 years of silence. "Did you know my mom?"